Good morning, everyone. Today is the 14th of March, 2020, and I hope that this is coming to you at the right time, since it is daylight savings time starting today. And hope that you set your clocks ahead an hour. I think for the first time in probably a while, my phone actually updated on time, and I got up at the normal hour. I say normal hour, I mean normal for when I usually get up, but hope you're doing well. And we're going to continue with our look at our character study of Daniel. And we're going to go to Daniel chapter 3. And here we're going to take a break and just refer to Daniel indirectly, because this is of course you probably know, this is the chapter with the fiery furnace. And this is the story where we see the resolve of Daniel's friends. And I think this is something that is very much in keeping with the kind of spirit that the early Christians had. Because you recall the story, Daniel's friends refused to worship the idol that Nebuchadnezzar sets up. And it's sort of an Old Testament parallel to early Christians who refused to offer incense to Caesar in the early Roman Empire. And so the early Christians kind of did the same thing as Daniel's friends did, and for the same reason and under the same kind of punishment. I mean, Christians would be executed for not doing this, and the Romans thought it was weird. The Romans thought it was strange that Christians didn't do this, because it was just a pinch of incense, just a little bit of incense. And still, the early Christians didn't do it. Well, Daniel's friends are going to be in the same boat. Well, when we see the story open up, we see that the story begin. We have that Nebuchadnezzar seems to not be very genuine. I mean, going back a chapter to chapter 2, verse 47, he says that Yahweh, or God, is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. But here he's setting up an idol, and that profession seems to have been sort of superficial. Again, that's not something that's unusual. I mean, I think you find that with a lot of people today. You know, oh, God's great, God's powerful, but I'm still going to go get drunk on the weekends, or I'm still going to fornicate or commit adultery, or, you know, do a lot of other things that are immoral, if not illegal. And so, yeah, God's great, but that's not going to stop me from committing some, sin. And I don't think there's any reason to think that Nebuchadnezzar was ever a believer in the God of the Bible. Same thing with Cyrus, right? Cyrus does serve God. Cyrus the Great of Persia, right? He lets the Jews go back home. He serves God, but there are a lot of people in the Bible who serve God's purposes, but who don't believe in him. In fact, I would argue that there are some people in the church who claim to serve God and maybe even do really good things for him, and don't really worship him, right? And so when we see this chapter begin, Nebuchadnezzar has this golden image that he set up. And it's probably to one of the Babylonian gods, maybe Marduk, who was the most powerful and kind of the leader of the Babylonian gods. It could have been Nebo, after whom Nebuchadnezzar is named, right? Nebo, Nebuchadnezzar. You can see how it fits there. It's the same way in Israel, when you would have people like Daniel, right? Daniel, his name means God is my judge, right? So you have these In pagan societies, you would have pagan gods who would have, or pagan people who would have the names of pagan gods as part of their own personal name. Just like in Israel, you would have people who had the name of, God, like Daniel, or Yahweh, like Obadiah, right? The Obadiah, Yahweh, so it means servant of Yahweh. So, same thing in other cultures in the ancient world. Well, he sets up this idol, and when they hear the sounds of music, everybody's supposed to fall down and worship the idol, and it happens. But there are certain, and the word here is Chaldeans, and the Chaldeans, this is a group of people who, it seems, there were different ethnicities who lived in Babylon. I want to say it was like three different people groups, and the Chaldeans were one of them. They lived in southern Babylon, and this particular group of individuals comes forward, or people who have this particular ethnicity come forward, and they accuse the Jews maliciously, and there are some who say, "Oh, well, here's these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they don't pay any attention to you. They don't serve your gods. They don't worship the golden image that you set up." Well, one of the things that you don't do in the ancient world is tell a king that somebody doesn't pay any attention to you, right? Because kings in the ancient world were sort of like, I'll use the word diva, right? I think that sort of captures the spirit. When you're in ultimate power, you kind of like people to do what you say, and it's kind of like, I don't know. This sort of reminds me a little bit of children who, the parents have laid down some very specific rules, and then one of the children comes and says, "Oh, well, there are certain children in our household who, pay no attention to you and do not do the things that you told them to." And what's the parent going to do? "Oh, well, too bad. I can't make those children do anything." No, in a responsible household, of course, the parent's gonna go investigate that, right? Well, here Nebuchadnezzar does exactly that. He wants to find out what's going on here, and so he's furious, and he is going to throw them into the fiery furnace, and of course it's heated to just super heated, right? And he's going to give them an ultimatum, where he says that if you don't do what I say, we're going to incinerate you, right? And he says, "And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Now, this is very, very important. This is a challenge not to the three friends. This is a challenge to God. Who is the God who's going to deliver you? Well, I want to go back. Remember when I said a little bit earlier that one of our previous classes, there are some parallels with the book of Exodus in this story, in the book of Daniel. And you can see right here, here's one of those parallels, because Pharaoh says, "Who is this God that I should let the Hebrews go?" Right? And Nebuchadnezzar says, "Who is this God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Right? Basically saying, who is this God who's going to stop me from killing you if you don't do what I say? And that is sort of a challenge, because see here that he's not challenging the friends, he's challenging God. He's picking a fight with God. And that's what's going to get him in trouble. This is a little bit like the school bully who says, "Meet me out behind the science portable at 3:00 and we'll settle this out. We'll sort this out." And God's like, Okay. Right? Not a problem for him, and a problem for Nebuchadnezzar. And so, you've got this challenge basically that's been issued. Now, what happens with the three friends is they say in chapter 3, verse 16, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. So they are defiant, right? And now they're still respectful, right? They still address him by his title, and seem to have they seem to have a respectful demeanor, right? Just because somebody's immoral doesn't give one of God's people the right to be a jerk. Okay, that's kind of the way that I look at it, because doing that just reflects poorly on us. I mean, obviously, but this in this episode, Daniel and his friends show resolve. Now, that doesn't mean God is obligated to save them. In fact, there are places in Scripture where it's very clear that God is supporting his people. Okay, so like Isaiah chapter 43, verses 1 and 2. It says, "But now thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the waters, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you." Well, this is great. God says he's going to be with his people. He's going to take care of them. He's going to be with them. You've got another place in Psalm 66, verse 12. It says, verses 11 and 12. Now, this is kind of a little bit of an opposite here. It says, you brought us into the net. You laid a crushing burden on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, yet you have brought us out to a place of abundance. And so you've got what seems to be three different perspectives or three different potential outcomes on believers being faced with adversity, right? So Isaiah 43, you seem to have this passage where God says, hey, don't worry about it. I'm going to be with you, man. I mean, you go through tough times, you go through difficulties. I'll be with you every step of the way. And it seems to have a positive outcome. You've got Psalm 66, and it seems like it's on the opposite side, but with a positive outcome as well. It's just they go through a lot of suffering, right? So he says, you brought us into the net, right? Like a fish captured in a fisherman's net, which is how kind of how they fished back then. We've had a crushing burden laid on our backs. People have run roughshod over us. None of these are positive images at all. But at the end, there's a positive outcome because the person's believed in God, right? And presumably never gave up, right? Even going through adversity. Now with the three friends and the fiery furnace, here you've got them going through a definitely difficult time, but God is with them in a very special way. God is with them in a way that he manifests himself in a way. And as far as, what that sort of takes the form of, a lot of disagreement on that because, and I guess I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. So let's put the pause button on that for now. But after they give this statement, they are not going to do what Nebuchadnezzar says. The fiery furnace is heated so hot that people standing by the door die from it. Now, I want to say, it's been a while since I looked this up, but there was some evidence in the ancient world that this was a form of execution. It's very, very slight, but it does seem that this is something that did happen in the ancient world. I mean, I hate to say this, but people throughout history have been very creative in how they execute people. Right? You look at modern Muslim terrorist organizations, and it's disgusting. It's vile. The creativity that they use to execute people who either aren't Muslim or who are what they consider to be Muslims who aren't faithful enough. They go after both. In fact, I want to say Muslims actually go after more Muslims than they do Christians or Jews or anyone else. But you have this creative mode of execution, and they fall into the fiery furnace. And then there is some kind of, not entirely sure how it was set up. The Bible doesn't really describe the furnace, but somehow they're able to look in, and in the flames they can see that there are 4 individuals there instead of 3. And one of them, it says, it says verse 25, I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Okay, whatever that means. I don't know that we know exactly what that indicates. Just that he looks like a, son of the gods. It could mean that he was bright and shiny. Who knows? The text doesn't really go into it very much. But the identity of this person, of course, is not really known, because the Bible doesn't go into the details that you and I think would like to see explored. It just says, here's somebody with the appearance of a son of the gods. Okay. It says nothing about his physical appearance. Some people have said this was Jesus. Some people have said this was an angel. I don't know that we can make a determination on that. You may have heard me say in other venues that I am not I don't favor the idea of the Old Testament being filled with what are called Christophanies. Now, a Christophany is an Old Testament appearance of Jesus. Okay, Christ, right? Christophany. And that it's similar to what we call a theophany. Now, a theophany is an appearance of God, but of course it has to be in a way that people can actually see without dying, right? Because God's glory and his perfection and his holiness are just too much. You go to Isaiah chapter 6 and you see the prophet, pronouncing a curse on himself because he's seen God with his own 2 eyes. Even if it's in just a vision, right? And so, a theophany would be the burning bush or the small, still voice that Elijah hears. Burning bush in Exodus 3. A variety of things like that. Maybe the 3 visitors who go speak with Abraham, right? And so that's a theophany. God makes a personal appearance. Some people have said this is a Christophany, which is a personal appearance of Jesus. And, there are things that people have said and argued, and it's not like there's no evidence behind it. I mean, I think there is some evidence there, but it doesn't persuade me. In fact, one of the 3 visitors who goes and visits Abraham, I heard a fellow make a fairly good argument one time that one of those was Jesus. based on other passages that we see in the Bible. And so I'm still not convinced. I'm still not convinced of it. But, it's possible, I guess. I just happen to see it as maybe the angel of the Lord, or something like that. Maybe a theophany, right? Maybe it was God, right? I don't know that it was an angel per se, because angels typically are just messengers, because that's what the word in Hebrew means. Malach in Hebrew means a messenger. In fact, that's the name of the prophet Malachi, right? Malach, Malachi, and it means basically my messenger, is what his name means. And so that's something typically where angels are delivering a message to someone. And this doesn't seem to be anything like that. It's just this kind of presence that protects the guys inside the fiery furnace. Here we find, very much like Pharaoh in the book of Exodus, who is, let's just say, educated on who the God of the Bible is. He said, who is this God that I should obey him, right, and let these people go? Well, 10 plagues later, you find out who this God is. He's better than you. He's better than all your gods. He can do everything that your gods are supposed to be able to do, but can't. He upstaged them, shown them all up, right? And so that is his education process. Nebuchadnezzar has one that's shorter and quicker, right? Good for him, I guess. But the story here is that he calls them out, and there is nothing that would indicate that they've even been near a fire, right? So he says, the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed. No smell of fire had come upon them, right? They didn't smell like smoke. Because that's what happens. You're around a campfire for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden you smell like smoke forever, or your clothes do, right? And so you would have no indication whatsoever that they'd ever been through an ordeal like this. It's utterly remarkable to everyone who was standing there, and so Nebuchadnezzar then makes a decree that anyone who says anything about the God of these three men is going to be torn limb from limb, their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Right? And so then he promotes them in the province of Babylon. Now, this is a character study of Daniel, and we are going through Daniel, and we have kind of like a little aside here. I do want to mention one thing very quickly, and that is people have wondered, there is a conspicuous absence of Daniel in this chapter, right? This is supposed to be about Daniel, and Daniel occupies so much of this book. He is conspicuously absent here in this chapter. Why? Why is he missing? Why is he MIA in this chapter? And I think it's for a very simple reason. You've got the presentation of the statue and the worship of this statue would be seen, I think, by some as a test of loyalty. I think Daniel, my personal view, is I think Daniel is above that. He's been so accomplished. He's been so valuable in interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream that he has been promoted, and this is something where Daniel's loyalty is not in question. Now, the three friends may have been very capable themselves, and they seem to be very capable people, but maybe they aren't quite up to the level that Daniel is. And so Daniel could very well have been there with the king, and or elsewhere. Some scholars have argued that maybe Daniel was on business away. Maybe he was with Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe he was sitting back and was at a position where when the statue is unveiled, maybe it's the people who are gathered below who have to bow down and worship, and those who are sitting up above in the expensive seats aren't required to do that, right? The king's not going to do that, and maybe his senior officials weren't required to either. Well, there was one person one time who made the argument that Daniel was there, and Daniel did worship, because in verse 2 of Daniel 3, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather all of these people from all over the empire to come to the dedication of the image, and they all gathered and stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. So that had to include Daniel. The text doesn't say that. Right? The text doesn't say that literally everyone bowed down. The text doesn't indicate that Daniel was among the group that did this. And so his absence is explained in a way that maybe isn't always 100% satisfying. I don't think Daniel bowed down to worship the idol. I just don't think that was the case, because otherwise, the Bible doesn't pull any punches when it describes the flaws of its heroes, right? I don't think Daniel was among that group, because his absence is very conspicuous. So, for those who think that Daniel may have given in a moment of weakness, I'm not so sure about that. We have to be very careful about making conclusions about what the text doesn't say, right? And that, to me, is not the most satisfying explanation for why we don't see Daniel in this chapter, because we do see a man who is absolutely resolute and uncompromising in his faith all the way from the moment he's introduced to throughout the book all the way to the end, right? And which is just how we should be, right? Every single one of us should be resolute and uncompromising in our faith, because we have the truth, right? We have the best way to live. We have the best way to think and behave and speak. And when you have privilege like this, truth like this, it demands our total loyalty. So anyway, that's our time for this morning. Again, if we're going to see you in worship this morning, we'll be delighted to do that. If you're still participating by live stream, then we will, sort of see you online. But no matter where you happen to be, I hope you're doing well and staying safe, and we'll see you next time.